We are at item 11, the discussion of possible action items. A, update on December 4th status conference. I'd ask Council Gooch to start that discussion. I believe this was attended by Council Gooch, Director Harness, and myself, and there were about, I watched the attendance, it was over 90 people that were in attendance at that status conference by Zoom, respectively. So, Council Gooch.
Chair, Dr. Cass, Honorable Board. Yeah, it was a very well-attended hearing. I think it was a very important hearing, given that none of the parties had an opportunity to have that public setting for quite some time. I believe the last hearing that was allowed before COVID was in February of this year. Highlights were generally put forth in the news regarding the IMR 12 findings, the concerns that were raised in that IMR 12 regarding APD's lack of compliance on some profound levels. The Department of Justice reiterated its intent to ensure that this process proceeds, that it doesn't get derailed, and the city echoed that as well. The general summary of how this process is supposed to get back in line is that the Department of Justice and Albuquerque Police Department with the city are working on something called a stipulated judgment that will provide ways that the parties believe these issues can be fixed. The general report was that these discussions are ongoing, and the representation was to the court that they are hopeful they will get something before the court by the end of the month. And Department of Justice, reiterated very clearly that if they are unable to get a stipulation regarding these issues, other enforcement avenues are still on the table. As far as the amici groups that appeared, they all were very, very concerned about wanting to ensure that this process got on track as quickly as possible. A few mentioned asking to hold the city in contempt. A few mentioned wanting to possibly seek intervention in order to help get this process back on track. And the court had a lot of good questions from everyone, including the CPOA and the CPOA board regarding their concerns. You should know that the court read the letter, was aware of the facts raised by the agency and the board, and it is on the court's radar that these are issues. The court also noted, however, that since neither the agency nor the board are parties to the litigation, it really is on one of the existing parties to pursue any kind of enforcement with the court for any of the concerns that the agency or the board might have. I am hopeful that the hearing was effective in getting your concerns in front of the persons, groups, people that needed to see it. I'm pleased that City Council, through its president, came to the board tonight to talk about the unfilled positions. As you will recall, the three main purposes, points, concerns that the board raised were: one, the unfilled positions; two, budgeting for the agency; and three, force review board materials that are provided to the board as part of its review of the serious use of force cases. I don't know when another hearing will be set, but it was my understanding from the court that if the parties would like, that the court would be amenable to allowing monthly updates the way the previously assigned judge allowed. And given how well the Zoom hearing went, I'm optimistic that in the future, if we are still in a COVID environment, we won't have the same delay that we had given the current pandemic. I would be remiss if we didn't point out how important it was the Department of Justice, the role the Department of Justice played in allowing that meeting to happen, the hearing to happen. As Chair Dr. Cass pointed out, there were over 100 participants at any given time during that hearing. Other than that, I stand for questions. I think that is a general outline of an all day, and it was a long day hearing. I don't believe we got done until about 5:15. Thank you.
Director Harness, do you have anything you'd like to add to this?
Chair Dr. Cass, no, I think Attorney Gooch did a great summary. I think the only thing that I would add was that the CPOA and their concerns came up early in the questioning from Judge Browning to the other parties. And there was a concerted effort from the Department of Justice and the monitoring team to advocate for the positions that were outlined in your concerns paper. And so I thought it was a good day for the CPOA and the status conference, albeit the need for us to find a stakeholder, or I'm sorry, a party to actually advocate for us in front of the court.
Thank you. So, I think one of the things that's come out of this for me is when IMR 12 came out, there was, of course, a lot of, at our last meeting or the meeting before, I've lost track of time. We were questioned about whether we had sufficiently expressed our concerns about what was, about the findings in IMR 12. And as a result of that, I invited one of the stakeholders to appear at the next meeting, at this meeting, to air some of their concerns. Well, the schedule got changed, and so it turns out I contacted that person and suggested that we would hear these from the same stakeholders that we're talking about, or there are these stakeholders in this case, at our next meeting. So I'm planning to put on the agenda essentially these issues that we see, that have been raised with IMR 12 and the court status conference and the subsequent city hearing or city negotiation to avoid being held in contempt by creating a separate plan. So at our next meeting, I will put on the agenda an invitation to stakeholders to come and present their concerns. So I thought this might be an appropriate place to tie that in. So are there any questions for anyone, Director Harness or Council Gooch, regarding the hearing? Member Olivas, are you raising your hand? Yes.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Cass. I guess this is for both Councilor Gooch and Director Harness. I'm wondering what you recommend the next steps for the board are. I know that we're certainly working to through the policy subcommittee to work on our proposed revisions to the CASA through the city. But I'm just sort of wondering what your take is on where the board goes next based on your interpretation of the
I'll go first if you don't mind, Director Harness. Dr. Cass, board member Olivas, I think at this point the board should just remain on top of these concerns and advocate for itself at every opportunity in its interactions, reminding folks that these are significant issues that the court used the word a lot, back burner. I don't want to characterize it the way the court did, but I think it's important that we keep these issues at the forefront. I recommend that Director Harness, myself, if you'd like, Chair Dr. Cass, continue to keep those dialogues going with the Department of Justice as well as the stakeholders and the city, whether it's through informal discussions about the Forest Review Board's materials, discussions with Council President Davis about how to help fill your positions, just to keep the momentum there so that it doesn't get to the point where the board is having to consider something like a legal proceeding to get your member positions filled. I don't think you're there yet, but I think as long as you keep it in the forefront, we hopefully won't get there.
Chair Dr. Cass, I don't really have anything to add. I think that the board needs to be aware of the public perception of its priorities when it comes to the IMRs and the oversight of the department.
I guess I want to expand on that a little bit, Director Harness, and see if I can probe your thinking a little more there. So, with regards to the global issues that were raised in IMR 12, and certainly it's not the first time that we've seen some of these issues raised, and many of them, or several of them, are not necessarily directly related to the board. They're not targeting the board or the agency in those paragraphs. But going forward, I think we want the city, the community wants this board to be the monitor in the future. When that's no longer the case, which now seems like it may be a long time, but nevertheless, I think we have to position ourselves for that. And I'm wondering how we, in some ways, become more relevant to some of those discussions that are happening, and assist the parties in moving in the direction of real constitutional policing practices.
Chair Dr. Cass, Member Olivas, I think that I would disagree with the point that it's not directly an issue for the board, because it simply wasn't in the paragraphs that are addressed by the CPOA. As Associate Monitor Giaquinto pointed out in our meetings, is that force is the underlying issue for the settlement agreement, and why the Department of Justice and the monitoring team are in place. And while the Department of Justice and the city are crafting solutions to resolve its issues with force investigations, to this point, the board hasn't taken any position and has been silent on what that should look like. How should this department get its arms around its force investigations, and what are the possible solutions? So that I think that there needs to be vigorous debate with public input as to what that crafted settlement should look like, as opposed to it being dictated by the Department of Justice.
I appreciate that, and I think that that's good. A good place that we need to go. I thank you for that.
Any other questions, discussion about this item? If there's no further discussion, this was just for information purposes. I don't believe there's any action required. I'm looking to see if, all right, no, I don't see any hands raised.